to affirm the resolution of the United States government to pass the Keystone XL pipeline. The plan text is pretty simple because it's as the resolution states. The first contention here is about dependency on Middle Eastern countries. The uniqueness is also pretty simple. I'm just going to bring 3 points to the table. First, while we do get a lot of oil from the U.S., we also get a significant amount of oil from the Middle East, namely Saudi Arabia and other countries. And another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of Middle Eastern countries are allies with each other, making cash flow between all these countries a very prevalent issue because as insurgent forces like ISIS and other terrorist forces, etc., are advancing through various towns and countries, they are able to make a lot of revenue on this cash flow generated. For example, ISIS makes $3 million a week. A large portion of that comes from oil production and selling. So the link here is that this legislation would decrease oil dependency on Middle Eastern countries, which makes sense, right? Because this Keystone pipeline is gonna keep oil in the U.S. from Canada all the way down to Mexico, rather than having to maintain diplomacy with Middle Eastern countries for just for matters of economic oil purchasing, and this will allow the U.S. to be dependent on this big economic energy resource. So what this does is that there's a couple of important internal links for this. So when, as I said earlier, when insurgent forces or terrorist groups like ISIS, etc., invade other countries, there won't be like a bunch of oil wealth that America can be at fault for when they are able to come from towns and villages, and thus this will restrict a lot of the cash flow toward terrorist organizations, which doesn't actually limit the amount of terrorist or insurgent forces, but it will decrease their potency because, for example, ISIS uses all the cash that they are able to generate per week to buy weapons, etc., to threaten innocent civilians around them and neighboring countries such as Israel. So the impact is that by passing this piece of legislation, known as which represents the Keystone XL pipeline, the opposition is directly saving lives as a result of not funding terrorist organizations and funding the war against ourselves in the U.S. So we're saving civilians on the streets in Iraq, as well as U.S. manpower that is still there. Also, there are other implications of acts of terrorism just beyond that of direct death. There's also a lot of mental health issues, which is a recent study by 2 Cambridge professors, which actually states that people who are in a place where terrorism is an imminent threat, they are less likely to go out and get a job and have a family because of the mental health toll that is on someone's mind and stress levels when there are serious threats. So by establishing this pipeline, we're reducing some of this stress and mental health issues and improving the quality of life of people around these acts of terrorism. So now I'm going to move on to my second contention, which takes a more economic stance at the Keystone XL pipeline. So as you know right now, the unemployment rate in the U.S. is about 5.5 to 6%, which doesn't exactly, which is actually not a bad sounding number. That's because it doesn't include people who are looking for a job, etc. There's a lot of people who are just getting out of college, don't necessarily start the job search, but are looking for a solid, well-paying job which just provides financial security. And on top of that, my second uniqueness point is that there's actually about 7 million people in the U.S. which are below the poverty line. There's massive negative impacts. That was large number of people below the poverty line. So the link is that in order to build and design and architect this Keystone XL pipeline, there is a lot of job demand. There are simple, just labor workforce jobs, such as installation and maintenance jobs. Those will cater more toward the younger population who's just starting to join the workforce and is going to help their family get out of a cyclical poverty cycle. But then also there's STEM jobs and architecture jobs and design jobs. These are extremely high-paying jobs by anybody's standards, and they're necessary to help design and architect the Keystone Pipeline. Because if anything, the Keystone Pipeline is really a feat of organization and 21st century technology and design, as I mentioned. So there are a number of really important impacts that will come out of this surge of installation and short-term installation and long-term maintenance jobs, as well as design and STEM jobs. So with a bunch of people lifted out of poverty, we are avoiding a bunch of negative impacts. People who live in poverty, on average, die 5 to 10 years before their fellow American counterparts. Also, people who live in poverty tend to have children which are 1.5 to 2 pounds lighter as infants than their middle-class counterparts, greatly increasing the chance of miscarriages or stillbirths, both actually surprisingly high numbers of both in the U.S. So also we're increasing the quality of life because people have more buying power when they have jobs, etc. So the reason that the affirmation is avoiding an increased amount of poverty, and we're also decreasing our dependence on middle-income countries. I just talk about the affirmation today. Thank you.
So as a brief roadmap for my speech today, I'm going to, first we are going to give our first advantage, second advantage, and before this we're going to give an alternate counterplan. Then we are going to move on to our opponent's first and second advantages. So
You said your two contentions.
We're going to do counterplan first, then our two contentions. Then we're going to go on to your contentions. Okay, so our counterplan, instead of funding the Keystone Pipeline from coming into action, we're going to use these funds instead of using them for the Keystone Pipeline. We're going to use them for nuclear energy research. Mainly because of the bipartisan support that it could reach in Congress, therefore making it more effective than what the pipeline would do from a political standpoint. And we are going to explain this a little bit later after going into our disadvantages to the resolution. So our first one being that of the environmental harm. So the Keystone XL pipeline will promote the use of oil instead of renewable energy. So that's kind of the first big problem with this plan here is that instead of furthering the environment and the environmental energy that we could get from this experience, from these funds, we're going to be essentially putting it towards something that is going to accelerate the already fast-growing problem of climate change. And so, to add on to this, the parts for the pipeline would have to be made in a factory, because these are not something you cannot just build a Keystone Pipeline out of like daisies that you find on the side of the road. Like, this is going to have to be stuff that we manufacture in a factory. And so as a result, factories emit huge, just crazy amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, which is essentially going to, the more carbon emissions and the more fossil fuels that we release into the environment, it means that we're going to get the fossil fuels or the carbon emissions are going to get trapped into the atmosphere, which is going to cause our planet to heat up, jump-starting global climate change and global warming. And the reason that this is bad is because plankton are going to die off the bottom of the sea, which is what the smaller fish eat. And so once the food source for main fish is kind of gone, what's going to happen is that the larger fish on the food chain who eat the smaller fish, who eat other plants, are also going to die off. And in doing so, this is going to disturb the entire food chain, which means that it's going to go all the way up to affecting humans, because the fish that we eat and the things that we eat are actually going to be gone as well. And so this is going to lead to mass starvation and death. And death, of course, is something that we want to avoid. Death is not a good thing. And climate change will lead to the extinction of all humankind and everything on this planet. So by voting yes on the Keystone Pipeline, this is essentially a vote to end the well-being of our environment. Now we're going to move on to our second disadvantage, that being of maintenance costs. So if this Keystone, whether it went through forests or rural areas or other places, it would be extremely costly to maintain this, especially when we have this imminent problem of climate change and global warming that's an imminent threat that we actually need to solve. And so when we're talking about like the cost of maintenance here, this is just something that we cannot afford to put through our economy. So maintenance also is going to be hard, because this is such a long line, and despite the fact that we could hire a lot of workers to get this done, something else that we need to keep in mind is that because people are fallible, any kind of break in the system is going to cause a huge, generous oil leak into the environment, which is going to kill off all the animals and the native species that live there, which of course we also don't want to do. And another point being that any action taken against the XL pipeline by people who are against it, such as like vandalizing, or if any action was to be taken against the pipeline itself, the oil leak, as we stated, would just be so magnanimous that it would just kind of destroy our environment. And this is something that would be a huge danger to the environment, and this is the only one we have. So building a pipeline when we have other alternatives is not the best alternative when we have one planet and nothing else. So now we are going to move on to our opponent's case. So on their first advantage, that being oil from the Middle East. Basically, the Middle East are our allies, and that like right now, ISIS is making money off of our purchases of oil. We'd like to say, however, that there's a greater impact on our side, because while they might have terrorism on their side, something that we have to remember is that if we go away from oil entirely and start pioneering the use of renewable energy, not only is it going to help us now with ISIS, but it's actually going to help us in the future with our future and the safety of our environment. Also, all the negative things with terrorism can be solved with our counterplan, as we would. I'll take your question in a minute once I'm done. So also the terrorism can be solved with our counterplan, because in our counterplan we're going to use the research for nuclear energy, which is going to be something that's going to benefit us not only in our military endeavors but also in our environmental endeavors. Next, on their point of terrorism leading to like poorer mental health. Like we've stated, this we can solve with our counterplan, because of the fact that even though people might be more likely to kind of have like PTSD-like symptoms because of this, and have less likely to get a job, less likely to have a family, this is something that is not unique to the situation of terrorism, because there are many people who suffer from depression and who are, as a result, unwilling to get or unable to get jobs. There are so many other Western mental conditions that have kind of created the same effect. On to their second advantage of the economy, they specifically talked about STEM job increases. The increase in STEM would not be significant, especially they were talking about the younger people in the workforce. We would like to say that only experts would actually be doing this, so people who have experience would already be putting their services forth, instead of the younger generation who needs experience, because realistically they're not going to give jobs to the younger generation who has kind of no ability, especially when the stakes are so high. When they stated that this is going to lift people out of poverty, we would like to state that poverty will be solved when we use the counterplan, because the maintenance of this Keystone Pipeline is going to be so great that it's that it is going to essentially be unattainable, especially when our environment is spiraling out of control, and we're going to need to fix all the problems that come with our environment. And so because the Keystone Pipeline would actually destroy our climate, accelerate climate change, essentially do nothing good, be prone to oil leaks and other such things, I would strongly urge you to vote in favor of negation of this resolution. Thank you.
Can I ask you?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I was wondering how you thought the like not doing Keystone would somehow help relations in the Middle East.
We basically stated on your first advantage. We basically stated that terrorism terrorism can be solved when instead of using oil in general, like whether or not it be from the Middle East, terrorism can be solved with us not putting our money towards it if we use renewable energy, because then we're not going to be dependent on oil whatsoever. So we need to start with that now and finding those effects.
Okay, so like, is oil more or less efficient than like nuclear energy? Is there like can you get like more or less energy from like oil than nuclear energy?
From what?
Okay, like
from.
Okay, you
So while it is,
Like that was the time.
Oh yeah, time. Okay. So what's next? Okay.
Alright, just for order, off on the roadmap, I'm going to go counter plan, off case in order, and then on case in order. Alright, so I'll go ahead and start my timer now. So they propose a counter plan that says that instead of building the Keystone XL pipeline, we're going to go ahead and just forget about the Keystone XL pipeline, forget about oil, forget about how we're currently running our economy, and go ahead and start funding nuclear energy support. Now here's why this is absolutely not practical whatsoever. We right now in current America are extremely dependent on oil, whether we like it or not. And scientists, if you ask any scientist, yes, perhaps oil does emit fumes, perhaps oil does cause global warming. We completely agree with that. But what we are saying here in the app world is that we cannot just step away from oil in the manner that the negation is proposing. We cannot just throw oil and throw the Keystone XL pipeline out the window and be done with it. That is not the way the world works. What about car companies? What about our entire economy? We can't just forget about that. We can't just move on. That's not the way America works, and that's why their counterplan is absolutely not going to work out. Their counterplan functions on basically two systems. The first is that suddenly, out of nowhere, there will be a bunch of STEM jobs, STEM promotion, and people will be more scientists will be willing to step forward and look at nuclear energy. But that is simply not the case, as I will prove later in the speech. And their second point is that it is just a better idea, a better way to combat terrorism, which I will once again counter later in the speech. So for now, we believe their counterplan to be completely impractical, and therefore you should not think about it in the debate. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and go off case. So their first disadvantage revolved around the fact that there is a lot of environmental damage that comes from oil, and that oil versus renewable energy, renewable energy is the better option. And here, the affirmation has nothing to say besides we agree. We completely agree that oil is not the environmentally safe option to go, but here's where we win the point. We cannot, as I repeated, we cannot just forget about oil. We cannot just step away from the Keystone XL pipeline because it is not practical. We will lose so many jobs right now in the car industry, in the way that we in the oil industry in the United States. We will lose so many outsourcing jobs if we just forget about what we have with us right now. We need oil in order to survive in this country, whether we like it or not. And there's absolutely no way we can just step back and forget about all of this. So if you look to their entire first intention judge, you can realize that it's just simply not practical. Their entire part about renewable energy just does not make sense in the current United States and should not be factored into the debate. So in their link, they discussed how phytoplankton is suddenly going to go extinct, but they provide no warrant as to how this is going to happen. We're going to have climate change, and then boom, no phytoplankton, and then boom, no humans. That's how they go. There is no warrant for how any of these things will actually happen at the rate that climate change is currently going at. So we cannot trust what the negation is telling us unless they provide a clear warrant in the next speech about how we're going to see this chain of events happen. Furthermore, they give us no link as to how large fish dying in the ocean, if they do at all, is going to lead to human extinction. Humans do not thrive solely on fish and oceanic species. We can't expect this because some limited species of fish in the ocean go extinct. So their impacts are completely improbable and blown out of proportion. The magnitude is far, far too great for us to even consider this debate. We see human extinction as just completely improbable compared to in comparison to the links that they offer us. So please do not factor in this contention into your decision because it makes absolutely no sense without a single warrant. So their second contention is about maintenance costs, and they say that a problem, a small crack or whatever in Keystone XL could be very deadly. But here's the thing, they're arguing against themselves. And here I'm going to go ahead and cross-apply something that I'll get to in our econ argument. So what they're saying is that there's going to be a crack in the Keystone XL pipeline, and then the environment's gone. Boom. The thing is that something like that is extremely improbable. We are not going to, as she said, we're not going to make this thing out of daisies. We are going to have actual engineers in place making sure that they provide the best materials. We aren't idiots. We know the risk of having a giant pipe run from Canada to Mexico. We know that there is a chance of a leak, but we're not going to let that happen. And that's why we're going to have so many people there, so many people employed so that they can make sure that nothing like that happens. And that's where we can cross-apply the argument with our econ advantage, because they say that we're not going to really have any jobs, or there won't be a lot of jobs available. But here, that's the point. They're arguing against themselves and saying that we'll need more jobs, we'll need more people there to check to make sure there isn't a mistake, and that's what we're providing. Having these engineers on board and ready to go in case there is a problem, which there is a very low probability of being one, we will have those people ready to fix the problem. Furthermore, they provide absolutely no impacts to this disadvantage, except for the small and improbable impact that there might be a leak. But however, they provide no warrant for this happening, and secondly, they provide no major impact as to what could happen if there was a leak, other than a small part of the environment which would be destroyed, all of which we can replenish if it actually happens. So I'm going to go ahead and move on case now. I'm going to go ahead and talk about our dependence contention first and then end with our econ contention. So in contradiction to our dependence contention, all they say is that it will improve Middle Eastern relations better if we get rid of, quote, oil entirely. And here, once again, the problem I'm stressing here is that we can't just get rid of oil entirely. We have to, if at all we ever get to a point where we can rely completely on human technology, it has to be a step-by-step process. If we just throw out all our domestic oil sources and forget about them, we're not going to get anywhere in this country. We aren't going to be able to ever prove ourselves to other countries as self-dependent. We're going to instead plunge ourselves into a dependence far stronger than we had before, because we're going to require the Middle East to provide us with our oil instead of getting it ourselves. So that's the problem. That's why we need the Keystone XL pipeline. Furthermore, the only other refutation to our dependence contention advantage was that they solve with the counterclaim. But they really don't, because all they're saying is, once again, we're going to replace all of our oil and research into the Keystone with nuclear energy, which is, once again, simply not practical. And furthermore, they say that they're going to solve our Middle East relations problems immediately with their counterclaim, which is, once again, they provide no warrant as to how they're going to do this. And furthermore, it just doesn't seem likely that you're going to invest in nuclear research and then have it ready for military use, and then suddenly the Middle East is going to like you. Because what's the Middle East going to do if they see you over here researching nuclear technology? They're not going to be very happy about that, right? So, in refutation to our last and final advantage, they say that the jobs that we create are not going to be significant. The STEM jobs that we have are going to pale in comparison to the number that they propose. But then their only problem with our their only main concern with their second disadvantage was that we wouldn't create enough jobs, we wouldn't have enough support there. So that's why this entire refutation does not make any sense. So because they have absolutely no real impacts in either of their two disadvantages, and that we solve for, and their counterclaim doesn't solve for any of our advantages the way ours do, I urge a very strong vote in the affirmation. Thank you.
There you go.
So for the roadmap of my speech, I'm going to first address some misunderstandings on our counterclaim, and then I'll talk about and review their advantage number one, And I will also clear up our disadvantage number 2 and address some refutations they made on it. So regarding the counterplan, Sheila says that oil is not the future of America, and nuclear energy is not the future of America, and oil is. But there has been many energy organizations that have said nuclear. For example, there are 100 nuclear reactors in America, and in 30 states, providing 20% of the United States power. This shows that nuclear energy has so much potential, and with the limited research we've already put in it, we can grow so much with this, and it is really an alternate solution, since it does not emit greenhouse gases, unlike oil. And also, Sheila said that the Middle East will not like us researching nuclear energy, but we've already made a nuclear deal with Iran. Little research on nuclear energy will not be too much harm. And now moving on to advantage number 1. So they have stated that the USA creates oil, but they also get oil from Middle Eastern countries. And if we move away from oil and disregard the affirmation plan and go to the counter plan, then we can, with the USA's oil, we can also harness the power of nuclear energy and make it so that is a major energy source where we can get our energy from. And ISIS, they have made a claim that ISIS, supposedly without money and with reduced income from oil productions, they somehow won't threaten the civilians living in the Middle Eastern countries, but ISIS still can threaten them with or without the incoming money, because they still have the power and the weapons that can threaten and cause what they say the Cambridge University's mental distress. And moving on to our disadvantage and clearing up some refutations. So the affirmation has stated that the Keystone pipeline will not be. It was improbable that some malfunctions can occur, but humans are faulty, engineers are faulty. There are many examples of how engineers have failed, like the Washington-Tacoma Narrow Bridge. That was a failure and architectural failure, and this one could be too. And it's probable since this can go through urban areas or rural areas, and even with people who are on guard and maintaining this long pipeline, it is still susceptible to many different things that might cause malfunctions and cause oil leaks. And Sheila has made an understanding that somehow disadvantage number 2 connects to the global warming, but my partner Maya has just stated that some oil leaks could just ruin the environment around the site where the leak happened, not totally ruin the environment. So they have stated that we have no warrant on supporting how this will cause that the Keystone pipeline is susceptible to malfunctions, but they provide no warrant on the fact that they're going to employ large amounts of people to maintain this pipeline, and that they're going to make this pipeline sturdy. So that makes their point not follow through on our contentions not having a warrant. And we're not saying that no jobs will be created is being bad. We're just saying that it's really expensive, and the maintenance costs and needs to be used for our future in something more expedient, like nuclear energy. And also, just another reiteration of how bad this is with the promotion of oil use in America. And now moving on to also reiterating the point that United States and Middle Eastern and ISIS, the income of ISIS will not affect how much they threaten the civilians living there, because they'll still kill people. Even without money, they can threaten and kill people, which makes their point invalid. Long-term future of the earth will depend on us, because we humans have made already have made a large impact on the environment. And oil is not the solution. Oil will run out, and it takes millions and millions of years to create more. So we cannot rely on oil, because it's going to run out, and we will run out of resources. And all those car companies kind of contradictory, because when the oil runs out, what are they going to do? Are they going to switch to electric cars? This is why you should support the affirmation and know that nuclear energy is the new solution, and we can make breakthroughs through it. Thank you.
Okay. So to give a roadmap for this final speech, I'm just going to start by kind of going over some points that have been ongoing in this debate, and then go through them in the perspective of an AFNEG world. So first we're going to weigh the impacts of this. So the impacts of this debate kind of have been going with the fact that on the affirmation, their impacts on their case of essentially employing this Keystone pipeline are the fact that that ISIS is going to continue to terrorize people with these funds, and and terrorism leads to lower mental health. However, we would like to state that that all of these issues and all these impacts are trivial when it comes to the extinction of humankind, which is what's going to happen if we use the AF plan. Extinction is going to happen because we are leaking oil into our climate. We are essentially going to accelerate this process of climate change, which already is going so fast. So the mental health of certain people and the possible death of a few people because of terrorism is not as much as the 8 billion people on Earth and all of the animals, and everyone is going to die on Earth versus some people from terrorism. And so as a result, these impacts are kind of insignificant compared to the extinction of humankind, which is what's going to happen as a result of this plan. So they also stated about their STEM, their other impact was that we're going to actually be able to kind of create, lift people out of poverty, create STEM jobs. However, to this, we'd like to say that, again, we won't. Poverty is actually something that we can solve. For with other ways. There are still going to be so many people without jobs, even when this plan is enacted. So poverty is something that isn't necessarily going to be solved by this plan. Also, about their point about STEM jobs, we'd like to kind of extend the argument that my partner gave in the previous speech, that these STEM arguments. The STEM arguments and the STEM jobs that would have to be created as a result of this still would be done by the more professionals, so not the younger people in the workforce, but the more professionals, because we are not going to be just betting on the younger generation who doesn't have as much technical training. So the STEM jobs created by this wouldn't be anything significant. So those are their two impacts, and they kind of pale in comparison to this impact of everybody dying from the result of accelerated climate change. So just the other thing that we would like to reiterate is that this is the way that climate change is going to work. Right now, we are in a situation where, if we were, imagine being in the hospital about to undergo, a heart bypass, and then telling the doctor, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to run a marathon, I'll do whatever it takes. But the thing is that it is going to be too late to change the track that we are on. And using oil and accepting our fate that climate change is going to be the end of humanity, and just using oil as to just kind of say that, this is what's going to be better because we're always going to be reliant on oil. Well, we're not going to live to see our future if we're reliant on oil. We're not going to actually see the true impacts of anything because we are going to be dead as a result of climate change. This is a huge impact that we simply cannot ignore. And what's going to happen is that in the affirmations world, we are going to have this accelerated climate change. It's just going to be terrible. It's going to lead to the extinction of humanity. And in the negations world, what we have is actually a sustainable future that we can live off of. And so because of these impacts and because of what the affirmations world versus the negations world is going to look like, I strongly urge you to vote in favor of negation of this resolution. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to do a quick off-timer right now. First of all, I'm going to talk a bit more about negations, contentions in order, affirmations, contentions in order to clean up a couple things, and then we're going to do actual and net comparison, just do a little bit of net calculus. Okay, I'm going to just start now. Okay, so even though both myself and my partner continue to bring this up, my opponents really never convinced me why there would be extinction. Sure, they mentioned that phytoplankton would die, but still never explained how phytoplankton would die. Because just think about it, phytoplankton live under the surface of the ocean, where there's plenty of oxygen, oxygenated water, right? So carbon's not going to affect that. Phytoplankton would only die if somehow the oxygen would somehow burn off, and they wouldn't have the correct water temperature. And he never explained how that would actually change, because you only talked about carbon emissions. So you never explained to me how the phytoplankton would die, and thus the link isn't strong enough to prove that there would be extinction. So now I'm going to move on to your point about your second mention about cost. So first of all, there are no impacts written here, and also I want to point that even if you think that you do have impacts here, which I didn't hear, it's also important that the afterworld still outweighs this, because you said that the problem with the Keystone Pipeline is that it's expensive, and that's exactly what actually but what actually does is it just creates jobs which are actually do take the other direction, as I mentioned. You guys seem to think that there wouldn't be young people, but these are maintenance jobs and construction jobs that do attract the younger generation. So whatever money is going to go into the Keystone Pipeline is going straight to the STEM jobs and to the younger construction jobs, which is exactly what the economy needs to lift people out of poverty. So next, and also on top of that, the nuclear facility is going to be far more expensive, because uranium nursing programs are much more expensive, and they have to require complex, encasing construction, stuff like that. Things that'll be a lot more expensive with a lot less jobs, because it's just like people sitting behind a computer, and so you have like less many jobs, etc. So moving on to the affirmations, first contention regarding dependency. Basically, once all was said and done, and all the points boiled down to it, my opponents sort of reverted back to the point, ISIS is going to kill people anyway, but what they essentially admitted here is that, yes, indeed, they will, ISIS and then other terror groups and more insurgent forces will have actually money in their hands to kill more people, which does perpetuate and actually make terrorism an even more prevalent issue, which does have huge impacts, having death and also mental health and quality of life that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to get back to the impacts later in the afterworld net rule. So now regarding the affirmations, second contention regarding the economy. So they essentially they called me out saying that there's no warrant on how to get to jobs. But I think it's this pretty clearly, right? In order to build something, you need people to build something. And people are jobs. So you need people and jobs to build Keystone Pipeline. Let's get much more crystal clear than that. So people will need to be hired either for construction, for maintenance, for installation, for design, for architecture. These are thousands of jobs which will be back into this economy. They're to solve some of the unemployment issues that we're dealing with right now, and bring the 3 million people out of poverty and lengthening people's lives and quality of life. Also, you seem to think that that this will pose some environmental threats, which you actually end up admitting any of the links would be small. And also, my partner mentioned that nuclear development was dangerous too. We don't have to look far to see how dangerous nuclear development is. Just think about Japan 3 years ago with the nuclear leak, killing people around the nuclear plant and destroying the wildlife, seaweed, fish all around it, making it impossible to eat any food off the north shore of Japan for the next few years. And it even came in to have radioactive docks floating into the California coast and Oregon coast. So the impacts are much more deadly for that of the nuclear plants. So in the afterworld is avoiding increased terrorist action, and we are also pumping jobs back in, making people's lives longer, increasing the successful birth rate percentage in the U.S. and overall saving lives and improving quality of life. In the net world, they are promoting the dangers of a nuclear blow up in a nuclear reactor. They're also not promoting STEM jobs and installation jobs, and they are not seeing the forest through the trees here. They're trying to go for a long-term goal with no impacts because they don't have any links in their first intention. But the affirmation is working in the now, right here, trying to get the energy that we need and the jobs that we need to get people out of poverty and save people from terrorism. So for all those reasons and more, I just joined the vote in the affirmation. Thank you.
Turn that off.